Let me start over now. So I figured it right here before the end of the year. Lots of people always wanting to get fit, looking at trying to, okay, break some bad habits, got to get going back with good ones. And it's just the way we go in America. There's so much junk food we eat from, Thanksgiving time. Actually, probably take it all the way back to October with, all the candy that happens at Halloween. So it's just like all the way through. And then in February, you're going to get inundated with, Valentine's candy. So it's just a big scam by the Eastern Syndicate that's trying to get you to eat more candy. But that's actually a phrase. The Eastern Syndicate part is from Charlie Brown's Christmas, if you didn't notice that already. But anyway, the idea of getting fit, getting ourselves right, it is a universal kind of idea, especially after we've kind of gone through the holidays and the winter, and we're like, feeling like I've been eating too much, and having family over and celebrating and doing all those wonderful things that we all look forward to. When do you start looking forward to next holiday season? Does it happen in January, February, summer? At some point, you're like, it's hot, it's been too hot for too long, and you're like, oh, I can't wait for the cool weather and the holidays to come and the lights. Anyway, so bodily training, by the way, which is the term exercise in that passage, is of some value. Scriptures say that, but it does tell us that the more important training is actually spiritual training, godliness. There is some value in exercising and eating the right things, staying active, but there is much more value in godliness, training ourselves to be godly in our activities, all the things that we do. And so looking at that, to kind of look at that, it's been a number of years since I kind of looked at this idea. First off is to eat right. Who here has already decided they got to eat better? Yeah, a whole bunch of us. Now I know a bunch more of you have done it because you signed up. I saw you posting on Jennifer's thing. You're going to eat better. You're going to eat all your veggies. You're going to tell her how many times you ate nice, raw, cut up vegetables, right? Well, so first off, let me kind of give you all these because I think this is kind of interesting, especially the first three. Milk, so dairy, water, bread of life. Now, water, everybody's like, oh yeah, I got to get good water. But even if you listen to people talk about water, if you ever listen to people go on about water, even our water is kind of bad for us. If you don't drink it in the right containers, you don't have the right, it's like water can all be bad for you too. Everything we ingest apparently can be bad for us. But two things here, milk and bread. How many people are like off dairy and no bread? What would be the modern equivalent God would compare, the bread of life to? Would it be the gluten-free protein bar of life? That's what Jesus is. But he tells us, and he uses these examples like eating to help us understand the concept of eating right. That's actually what the setting up a reading schedule for this year is kind of all about, trying to have the entire congregation just involved in regularly reading their Bible every day, ingesting some things that are good for the soul. And in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2, he's urging us to desire the pure milk of the Word, that we can grow thereby. I'm not going to go to all these passages and look at them, but the idea, we need to desire reading the Bible. That really is a Christian's, that's how we actually go from being a babe in Christ to being an adult Christian. Just like these new little kids we have, in the room and things, they've grown up to the, where they're at because they got milk early on. And then they started getting a little more solid food, a little mushy food. And then Eventually they start eating real food. That's how they grow. And he's saying that's how we grow. That's why the elders, and Rich talks about it so much. Have you been reading? What's your reading schedule? What kind of reading schedule have you been doing? What have you been reading? Because for a Christian, the Bible is centrally important. Now, I've had the chance, obviously, to come in contact with lots of different religious people. I'm always quite amazed at people who are religious. I mean, they go to church. What would you say? Somebody goes to church every single week and still believes that the wise men from the east showed up at the manger. And yet, that's true. More than 50% of people that go to church all the time believe that. I'm not talking just like Churches of Christ or anything. Or kind of restoration type churches. I'm talking about how do you actually believe things that are so clearly untrue even though you're a Christian? How does that happen? It's because we don't really, and actually many religions don't actually really encourage all the people to be students of the Word. That your primary connection to Jesus Christ are the letters and words He sent to you. I mean, if you had a loved one that you couldn't see and you couldn't be around, but you had their letters, would you read them? If they gave you a letter maybe before they passed away and they wrote out a big letter to you and said, this is all the thoughts I have and how much I love you and how much I think of you and how much I'm just encouraging you to move on and press on to the great goal, would those words mean much to you? Would they be your connection to that loved one that you no longer see? How much would they mean to you? Because that's essentially what the Bible is for us and God. It is His letters to us. It is the words He has given to help us, His people, because that's what they were designed for. They weren't designed for the whole world. People who don't want to believe, who don't want to follow, they can look at it and go, that's kind of ridiculous. That's not any different than when Jesus spoke. When Jesus spoke, He actually talked about speaking in Proverbs from time to time. And He would say, He said, God, speak. They asked Him, why do you speak in Proverbs? He says, because those who want to hear will hear me. And those who don't, won't. And so the Bible has been created for those who want to hear, that they can hear the message and grow by it. That's what Peter is urging us. Why he wants us, because that's the pure milk. Here's the reality, and I'm going to take a shot at myself or any other teachers, any other preachers. We're not the pure milk. I'm giving you commentary on the pure milk. I'm giving you my thoughts on what I think the pure milk teaches. And I hope they're of value. I work at it, I study at it to try and make the comments I make the Word come alive for you. But this is commentary. This isn't the pure milk. You cannot exist on commentary. It'd be like, having the babies, it's like, you don't need milk. It's like, go make yourself a sandwich. Like, how many little babies are going to survive when they're being told, go make a sandwich? Go make their own sandwich. It's like, don't you know how bad milk and dairy is for you? No. Drink the living water. John chapter 4, 13 through 15. I hope you know the passage. I know most of the people here probably do. Jesus went to Samaria, met a woman who was coming to get water for herself. And he was sitting there. His disciples had gone off to go get something to eat, go grab food for them. And he's like, hey, can you give me some water? Now, he's probably asking for a couple different reasons. The wells weren't just like public wells. You had to bring your own pots to them because water was a scarce commodity. And so it wasn't just open for anybody to come and do. So he was asking her to go get some water out of the well and give him some. Can you give me some water? She's a little surprised by this Jewish man sitting there talking to her. It's like, well, you guys don't like us Samaritans. We're a bunch of reprobates. That's kind of how the Jews looked at them. He's like, why are you even looking at me, and why are you looking at me? And he basically says, if you knew who was asking you, you'd ask me for living water, and you'd never have to drink again. And she's like, I want some of that water. And so he goes on to tell her that he really is the water, the living water that brings life for us. And so it really is the message from God. It is the message of Christ himself that brings us life, that helps us know who we are as Christians. And then in John chapter 6, and verses 31 to 40, let's read this. And if you have your Bibles there, turn over or flip through it or hit the right buttons on your tablet or phone, whichever method works for you to read the passage. In John 6, starting in verse 31, he said, our fathers ate the manna. This was actually said to him. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. And they were asking him for a sign. He said, what are you going to do for us? So he has, just before this, he's walked on water and fed 5,000 people. Okay? And then they come to him and they're like, what are you going to do? Like, so our fathers, they got manna for 40 years. Bread out on the ground every single day. And apparently it was kind of sweet. And so you scooped up enough for the day for everybody, and that was your main sustenance for each day. And so they're asking him, so they're comparing it to that and saying, well, in the past, they gave manna every day. And so what are you going to do? And Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven. Now, to a lot of Jews, they would have been, wait a second, no, Moses was the one. But he says, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. The manna, as we studied in this last quarter in the back, was a foreshadowing of Jesus. And he said, that wasn't the real bread. That you had to go out and eat it every day. He says, the true bread is him who gives life, and that's Jesus. And he's telling us that we need to eat of that. And he says, going on, and so they, sir, give us this bread always. Now, doesn't that statement almost sound like they're not listening? Okay. He said, the real bread is him, this guy God sent. And they're like, oh yeah, can you give us that? Can you imagine the frustration he must have felt sometimes talking to people? They just didn't really hear it. And so he said to them, I am the bread of life. So he kind of said it. They didn't get it. So then he was real blunt about it. I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me. Whoever comes to me I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. This is the eating that's so important to us. Remember even what Jesus said to Satan when he was sent out into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan? Now, I don't know, do you think, sometimes, do you look at the temptations Jesus faced as not as hard as sometimes the temptations we face? Have you ever had that thought? Now, some of you might not want to admit it, but sometimes you look at the temptations, he's like, turn these stones into bread. And, it's like, here, I'll give you, rule over all the world. Look at it. It's like, and you're like, those don't seem that hard. Now, probably because they're not that tempting to me. But Satan knows how to tempt people. He knows where it really hits us. These hit Jesus. And he hadn't eaten bread in a long time. And you can think about it. Julie doesn't eat much bread now. And so it's kind of where she's mostly off wheat, maybe scant amounts here and there, but mostly doesn't eat wheat anymore in her diet. But the other day, I can't remember exactly where we were. We walked in, and they had bread, fresh bread cooking. And it's like, oh, I love the smell of bread. And more than that, I love to eat bread. I miss bread. So to imagine yourself, you haven't eaten bread for 40 days, and she probably hasn't eaten that for that period of time. And then you're like, and then you smell it, and somebody talks about it. He's, oh, don't you love nice, warm French bread? You kind of cut it open, put butter all over it. It's like, oh man. Well, he hadn't eaten, and he's like, oh, you could just. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I could just turn that rock into bread. It's like, oh, but no. The words of God are really my food. Jesus said that a couple different times. But he said, man doesn't eat. He doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. See, Jesus had, in other places he talked about it too, he had food of which the disciples didn't know. One of the times he fed all those people, and they're like, we don't hardly have any food. How are we going to feed all these people? And he's like, and another time they come to him, he's like, well, do you have something to eat? He's like, well, I have food you don't know about. It wasn't physical food, it was spiritual food. That's what allowed him to keep going. It's allowed him to be hungry and keep going. Eating right. Now, this is kind of a transition one. Now, I want you to look at this in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And in Ecclesiastes 12, in verses 11 and 12, he talks about some things. He says, the words of the wise are like goads. A goad is actually like a cattle prod. Okay? So it's like a stick you have with a little, kind of a dull point on it. So it doesn't break the skin, but you hit, you poke cattle, you poke a horse, and what do? You hit them in the rump and they go. That's what a goad is. And he says, the words of the wise are like that. They're goads. They're there to try and get us to move. And he says, like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They're given by one shepherd. He says, my son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Now, he didn't say just studying other people's writings. You get tired. How many people try to read at night and get tired and fall asleep? And don't finish their reading. Yeah, I have to read in the morning. I'm no good at that at night. And so, even the best stuff, if all you did was eat, this passage makes me think of, and many of you probably know the stories, where kind of in the Middle Ages especially, theologians would kind of lock themselves into monasteries and just read and study and copy and then go to bed and get up and keep doing it every day. And it's like there's value there, but they're missing something because they've locked themselves away so they can't actually practice all the good stuff he's told us about to their fellow people because they've locked themselves in this little room to do it by themselves. That isn't the purpose of the words of God. We're supposed to eat all this stuff, not to simply get tired on engorging ourselves with it, to study it to the point that I don't do anything with it, but to do something with it. And this is what reminds me of you got to move it, move it. I didn't get as many laughs as I thought it would. So hopefully you guys all seen that Disney flick and you're picturing that song, Time to Move It, Move It. But you have to actually do something. You got to practice, practice, practice. It isn't enough to study or read or eat the words of God. because we have to take them in and then go find places to practice it. Where can I practice that? Now, for most of us, we don't have to go anyplace. Most of us probably, some single people might live by themselves. Okay, they got to go someplace or they got to contact somebody to practice it. But most of us have other people at home. So it starts right there, practicing it at home, right? So Hebrews chapter 5, he talks to us about having our senses exercised to discern good and evil. That's actually how the Word of God grows. And part of the way the Word of God grows in us is to not just read it, but to then practice it and go, oh, that didn't work. I think Dave, was next person he wanted to talk about was to those people who intended to do the right thing and did the wrong thing, right? Last person you talked about was have bad intentions and bad actions. Well, sometimes people do bad actions but have good intentions. Right? I'm guessing Jephthah might be on there and some others that they can think of that sometimes had good intentions, but did some things that I don't know about that. And so why? If you haven't actually put the Word to practice, then you haven't found yourself doing that. Where you go, okay, I want to try and help my brother caught in sin. That's actually not, in that passage it says, you have to be careful yourself trying to help others caught in sin, that you yourself don't get kind of caught up in sin too. And there's kind of a reason for that. If you spend much time trying to help other people in sin, you find out that it's actually difficult. Not everybody wants to get out. And I think the analogy of somebody caught in, like an animal caught in a trap, if you were approaching an animal caught in a trap, does it just want to, like, oh yeah, go ahead and do that, I know you're good, or is it actually going to snarl at you and try to bite you? And you might have to, get its teeth away from you in order to actually help it out of a trap. Because that's actually what happens a lot of times, trying to help people caught in sin. It doesn't always go smoothly. It doesn't always go easily. It's often messy. And people get hurt, and it doesn't go as like you thought it would go. And you said things, you say, I shouldn't have said it that way. And that's what happens. But trying to practice the Word is how we grow at it. Just like how we learn anything. Most of us, in everything we've learned, somebody initially told us about it, or we read about it. And then so we watched somebody do it, and then we went and started doing it. Now, at each one of those levels, you go and read it, and you think, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I get that. It's easy. And then you watch somebody else do it. You go, oh yeah, I can do that. And then you start doing it. It's like, well, why didn't that work? How many times have you seen a recipe and gone, oh yeah, that sounds great. Watch somebody even do it. I love those Facebook ones. It takes like 30 seconds for the person to do this incredible meal, and then, like, 3/4 of it is kind of edited out of it. And you're like, oh wow, that looks awesome. And then you try to do it, it's like, that didn't come out very good. But the next time you do it, it'll get a little better. Because that's how we actually grow. The next passage, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. Passage, hopefully you know a little bit, that we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. That is why He made us Christians, to go do good. Now, sometimes we can hide away, and it's like, well, no good showed up at my door today, so I didn't have opportunity. It's really not what He's wanting from us. He wants us to go out. Get out of our little zone. Find other people whom we can help, that we can do good to. And the truth is, we have jobs. If we work, if we're involved in kids and their school or whatever, we meet people, we contact people. How can we help? We need to be helpful people. We need to be good, industrious, hardworking people who are always seeking to be generous and kind and giving to others. That's not that hard, is it? It's not that complex. But sometimes it's hard to do all the time, isn't it? But that's what we were created for. That's our purpose as Christians, to do good. In Galatians 6, 9 and 10 says, don't grow tired, don't get weary of doing good, for in due season you'll reap. And then especially to the house of faith, do good. Do good to everybody, but especially your own people. That's like happens at home, right? And our own family and our own house, it's like that's where we need to be good, and then we need to be good to others too. Too often, people have an image of being good. And this is kind of generic about people. Some people have an image of being good, and at home, their family doesn't like them. Not uncommon. And that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not godly. Because our family is where we really put it back. That's why the test for leaders of a church is really the home. Not where they work, not how people outside see them. Not that that's unimportant, that actually is mentioned. But the home is the critical measuring stick. Because that's the place we always contact people. And it's the place that it's easiest to sometimes give up on, right? Because we don't have to sometimes work at home. We're out there kind of trying to help people, doing good. We come home, we're tired, we're angry, we're grumpy, we're hungry, or as sometimes I say, hangry. And then they get the, kick the dog, spank the kid. It all kind of rolls down on the family. And that's not really what God's asking of us. We have to find ways to not give up. Now, this next section is designed with that in mind. God talks a lot about this. I just use the image to relax, to rest, and to reduce worry and stress. Really critical for us to be godly people. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, Jesus talked about the Sabbath day. One of the things that happened a lot is Jesus would do miracles on the Sabbath, heal people and things, and they were accusing him of breaking the Sabbath. As if I don't think they actually accused doctors of breaking the Sabbath when they healed people. And if somebody fell and broke a leg, was somebody not supposed to help them? It's like, oh, I might be a nurse or a doctor. Can't do that today. You got to wait till tomorrow for me to set that. They didn't really practice that either. Did a midwife not go on a Sabbath day to help somebody having a child? Or were children never born on the Sabbath? So they had kind of an unusual outlook on the Sabbath. But Jesus told them the Sabbath was given for man. It's like God didn't need it. God said He didn't need you to have a day of rest. He said you need a day of rest. You need to not work every day. We're doing a class here a number of years ago. One of our former members, we were talking about working and Sabbath and having this one day off. And the person's like, well, I only work 5 days a week. I don't work 7. Should I work 6? Are we not working enough? And I said, well, I think we probably often misunderstand what work is, because the truth is, I would suspect that 99 to 100% of us really never take a 24-hour period we don't work. Because the kind of work he talked about, you couldn't cook. How many people would like that, by the way? You couldn't do dishes. You couldn't do laundry. You couldn't make a fire. Couldn't cut firewood. You just hung out with your family. thought about God. That reminds me of how many people saw the image on Facebook of what life was like on Thursday without CenturyLink? Little house on the prairie with the little candle reading a book. It did feel that way a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, I can't turn on Netflix. I can't go do anything on my computer. My phone has terrible coverage at my house without Wi-Fi connectivity. And so it's like, wow, I guess I'm really not doing anything today. So most of us don't do this. And I think we miss the point Jesus was making, is when God commanded us these things, he didn't do it for his sake as a power play to say, I can force you to do this. No. This is good for you to rest, to take time to rest. I think it's one of the reasons why it allows us to do the previous slide, that we can actually keep working. The only way to keep working is not burn ourselves out. And the only way I think we can really not burn ourselves out is to actually make sure we have those times where we rest. And I mean just really have that time where nothing is really going on. I worry, I don't know if anybody else does. Anybody else worry that younger people can't ever get away from that? That the phone is, the connectivity of the internet to the phone, to the individual people, it's like you're in the middle of doing something, oh, just got a message. Oh, got another message. It's like, and there's no turning it off. That there's constant, and I don't know what the output of that is going to be, or the long-term effect on young people, but I worry about that there's no off switch. A lot of workers, you are at your boss's beck and call all the time, right? To call you on the phone, text you, get you whenever they want to get you. That's tough. It's hard to deal with. Take some time from work. Now, this is a little different than rest, because if you don't know this passage, Deuteronomy 16 is the passage, this is one of the passages where God commanded them to do 3 feasts, week-long feasts. They had other days of rest besides the Sabbath, but these are 3 week-long feasts, which we know of. The Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread was one of them. Okay, the Feast of Booths and or Tabernacles, and the harvest. I'm forgetting the third one right now. Anyway, there are 3 week-long feasts that they all had to observe. And those feasts, by the way, were whole weeks they didn't work. That they actually went to the temple or tabernacle, and they just spent a week away from working 3 times a year. And to get away from that daily grind. Because all of us suffer from the daily necessities of providing for life. And that makes us and adds stress to us. But we need to make sure we're taking the time to get away from that. Don't worry, be happy. How many people love that song? Did it start to annoy you, though, after a while? You can still hear it, can't you? That little reggae sound to it. Now, Jesus basically told them not to worry. And to not worry doesn't mean to not plan. He wasn't saying don't plan for things. It's like, hey, make plans. People had to plan. They had to plan for what they were going to do next season, what they were going to do next week. But, you make plans for the other, when you need to do stuff, and then you set them aside, and you don't worry about the things you can't control. You don't worry about the rain, whether it's going to rain or not. Can you control it? Can you stop it? Can you start it? No. Can you just don't worry about those things that you don't have a control over. Let it go. I got some laughs at that one. Okay. It is harder to do than that. Don't worry, be happy. We were at one of the happiest places on earth a couple weeks ago, and or whenever we got back, and we all laughed this one morning. We're sitting there waiting to take a bus to one of the theme parks, and this lady, I mean, we're talking, this is like 7:38 in the morning, right? Not even opened yet. They've just come down from the hotels. You think they just had breakfast. Looking at her son, I don't know, he's probably 10-ish. And she's like, I am so sick and tired of your attitude. Be happy. Like, be real easy to be happy now. Like, he's like, I could feel her frustration with whatever her child was ticking her off. But it's like, you can't command people to be happy. It really is something you have to do for yourself. But one of the ways that is accomplished is by us letting go of the things we just don't have any control over. Give up the illusion that you can control everything, that you can fix everything, that you can do everything. You can't. Accept it. Don't worry about the things. Let God take care of you. He said he would. He promised he would. Put him first. And the rest of it will work out. May not work out easy, right? The path isn't always easy. The end will be worth it, but he'll see you through it all. That's what he's promised you. Tell him all about your trouble. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, he says, cast all your cares on him because he cares for you. How do you let go of stuff? It's like everything that's weighing on you in your heart. You say, you got to let God know and say, God, I can't deal with this. I need you to help me. Like what Jeremy was talking about in the songs this morning. Pleading for God to rescue us, to help us when we need him, when we need his help, we need his care. Remembering that. And one of the ways we do that is prayer. And that's kind of 1 Peter 5:7. I didn't go to all the passages about it. But you have to think about God. You've got to just let him be your Father that helps you out when you're in need.